Welcome to Selling Circular, the podcast that explores the intersection of commerce and sustainability. In this episode, we're discussing the journey of unwanted clothes from our closets to their next life. And this journey is, well, for maybe our listeners, they have either a knowledge that it's a little more intricate, or maybe they don't, but it's way more intricate than maybe even people realize. I'm Garr Punnett, CEO of Loop Layer.
I'm Sabira Lakhani, VP of Product at Readly, and thank you all for joining us. We're continuing in this season to interview entrepreneurs and industry leaders who have real-world experience in making circular economy strategies and practices come to life in their organizations, which is wonderful.
We need some subscribes. We're growing, which is great, and I'm not begging here. Just please subscribe if you want to. We're just trying to grow our circularity movement here. But if you'd like to be a part of this, you could either reach out to us on LinkedIn or visit our new website at sellingcircular.com. On LinkedIn, I think we even have a new group forming. The Selling Circular podcast page on LinkedIn is also fun. There seems to be some conversations going on there that we get to tap into.
I never thought that I would be a please subscribe kind of person, but here I am.
I kind
It's
of
a
always
new
knew I
age.
would be, truthfully.
Yeah,
I knew this. It's my
I knew you would
destiny.
be too.
Yes. I just owned it now. Yeah.
Well, let's see. So because we're talking about unwanted and I guess also wanted clothes, depends on who. We're asking
Well, in a circular
ourselves,
life, everything is wanted and
yeah,
unwanted. Yeah.
yeah, it's like the duality of it, which is
Aren't
kind of cool,
we
yin
all
and
in
yang.
some way?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. A little existential here
Yeah.
this morning.
In terms of podcast hosts, actually, we're always unwanted and wanted.
Yeah,
We live in that same thing. Yes.
that's why we're asking for
Yes.
this subscribe.
Yes. Yeah, that's why we need the subscribes. Just please prove us that we're wanted a little bit. That's it. Yeah.
Please want us.
Yeah.
I'm going to a wedding not this coming weekend, but the weekend after, and it's actually on my list to get a dress from a thrift store. And I didn't get to it this weekend, which I'm a little mad at myself. I'm like a very aggressive to-do list kind of person. But once upon a time, this wasn't my most recent thrift, but I found a beautiful black BCBG dress that I wore to a friend's wedding. But even more special than that, say, as I'm talking, I'm remembering that when I got married a couple of years ago, I found the dress that I wore to my reception on Poshmark. And it
Oh,
was
cool.
basically new with tags. It was this gorgeous, I forget the brand, but it had like pink and purple and blue ruffles. It was very like ruffly, fun picnic dress. We had our reception in a park, the public park, which is exactly my bag.
Yep.
And I also found a belt and a hat that went with it together, and it became like this whole kind of like summer wedding picnic, gorgeous, like
That's
floor
excellent.
length, expensive dress that I got for way less than I budgeted, which was
Nice.
great.
Excellent.
And the only alterations that it required was I needed to wear the belt, which I think like helped make it look good, and then the shoulder length was too long, so my mom just like folded it over and sewed it, and then it fit perfectly.
Right.
It's actually kind of like a huge risk now that I think about it. I'm like, we decided 6 or 7 weeks ago, before we actually our wedding date, that we were going to get married on that date, and to like take that risk on Poshmark is kind of wild.
That's pretty cool. So do you also, is there a reverence for this dress that it's now in a closet somewhere, or is it now just a part of a wardrobe?
No, I haven't worn it because I haven't been to like a summer thing
Yeah.
like that. Since then,
Like you haven't
it's
been to a summer thing,
there.
like a wedding in a park, like a big deal. Like, okay, yeah, I get that.
Not that, yeah, not in a while. But I haven't worn it, so I'm upset about that. And I have thought about like,
Yeah.
why is it still there? Um, I'm
Is
not
there a part of
sure
you
what the plan is.
is there a part of you that takes it almost too seriously? You think that it's because you could probably rock that dress anywhere you would want to go.
Yes, yes, it is definitely my MO to like, I don't
Down.
like dressing up. Yeah.
Right. Down. Yes. Let's get cash. Okay. Got it.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So I feel like it's too much. So I have to get over that.
Well, I only bring that up because I think that is probably the nature of how we're in kind of relationships with our clothes. Like when we choose, when we want it, when we don't want it. Again,
Mm,
of how when your old clothes don't quite fit into the social life that you might have more casual. Well, when you choose to end that relationship, um, hopefully you donate that clothing. Not end the relationship. Like Sabira might put the relationship on ice in the back of her closet, but this is like when you when you wanna like really end it, but do it gracefully and amicably so the clothing can go and have that fresh start as a sort of a serial dater in the waste world. So clothes are so interesting from being handpicked from a
mm,
pile to flirting on a thrift store rack. If they're
mm.
lucky, they'll end up getting cozy with somebody new. But if for the less fortunate, they kind of will end up in a Toy Story type of inferno scene that does not end well.
Oh, the drama.
Oh, the drama. Yeah.
But it's true. And jokes aside, the journey of unwanted clothes to their next life is way more intricate than people realize, especially because there's so many types of materials, there's so many collection methods, so many facilities, a lot of different humans aggregating, sorting, hanging, and just there's really a lot of options. I mean, you can name the options, right? There's reuse, resale, donation, recycling, incineration, right? Those are kind of the options, but in the practical real world, all of these options are around you. You may or may not notice them. There are systems around you that exist. And um, the Resource Recycling Systems nonprofit, short, they go by RRS, and Fashion for Good together came up with a report recently that really paints a really interesting and intricate picture of the textile reuse and recycling systems in the US. And their research found that about 15% of textiles are currently recovered through reuse or recycling, and up to 56% of discarded textiles could be potentially suitable for fiber to fiber recycling. So that's a huge potential opportunity, and we could really avoid sending all of these textiles to landfill, and establish new ways of reuse and recycling in the textile and material industry. The other thing, which I kind of hinted at, that this report highlights is that diverse ecosystem of actors, charities, thrift stores, for profit collectors, sorters. And this all goes to kind of point a light at the consumer behavior and the systems and infrastructure that are both the barriers and unlockers to increased recovery rates and increased landfill diversion rates. So we want to get to understand these dynamics and look at the industry with a little bit more of a magnifying glass so that we can scale textile recycling and grow demand for more sustainable fiber sources.
So if this sounded complicated, this was just us distilling down what these systems mean and how complicated this ecosystem is of reclaiming fabrics and textiles and the useful clothing that we might take advantage of when we're just walking into a Goodwill. There was a lot that went into putting that back on the rack. So today we're joined by Marisa Adler, a senior consultant at RRS who worked on this illuminating report. And Marisa brings an extensive experience in waste management and circularity, and she really helped us understand some of the challenges and opportunity in textile recovery and recycling. This is a great podcast. We got into a lot, and then we discovered we'll probably need to have her back to even do more because there's no end to this. I think
I
this saga.
generally feel that after all of our guests.
That
I'm like, there's so much more.
there's so much more.
There's more.
So that is the world we live in. There's always so much more we could be diving down in, and we look forward to having her back. But please enjoy this one as well. Marisa, thank you for joining us. Sabira brought you to my attention, the report to our attention. This is the report that I'm mentioning is the RRS Sorting for Circularity USA, which you all did in conjunction with Fashion for Good. Loved all of the findings, all of these figures and all of these stats that we got to nerd out a little bit. But I'd like to start with you. Tell us about you. How did you get into the space of both RRS, but circularity, sustainability, your passion for this work? Paint us a picture of that trajectory.
All right. My passion for this work. So I started my career with the New York City Department of Sanitation. Was there for about 8 years after having studied natural resource management and conservation as my undergrad and my grad. And when I graduated, I was like, okay, I think I can go in one of two directions. I can either go be an ecologist or a field biologist and be out in the woods and study birds and trees and things.
Yeah.
And, then I realized that path would be lots of bugs biting me every day, chasing seasonal work. It's highly competitive, very, very low pay. Or I could go into the field of waste and recycling and preserve our ecosystem and our biodiversity by making sure that we are extracting our natural resources thoughtfully and we are managing our materials sustainably while they're in use. So went that direction.
And a consistent non-seasonal work. I mean, this is, you're not chasing anything. You're dealing with waste. Yeah.
Steady paycheck. So I took a big leap and I applied for a position at New York City Sanitation. They happened to be hiring. I got really lucky because right after I was hired, the whole city went on a hiring freeze because it was right and around 2008, the economic downturn. And was with sanitation for about 8 years, working on all sorts of municipal policies and programs related to every aspect of waste that you can.
So we're going to take a quick pit stop into Streets and Sand. We've had a colleague, I believe, that did a little bit of work with Streets and Sand previously. Can you? New York's been in the news a little bit recently in our news. I think there's been some recent movement on trying to get bins placed in New York City. Can you help us understand the landscape of New York streets and sanitation and both everything that was going well and all the good work that you all are doing and all the challenges that faces such a megalopolis type of environment where you just have a lot less space to deal with waste and a lot more people in and around that waste. Can you help? I would love to talk to you a little bit about that.
It's a huge challenge, but at the same time, there's a huge opportunity. And I think that's what was exciting being at sanitation. It was a lot of hard work and a lot of red tape and bureaucracy to get something in place. But once it was in place, you automatically impacted a city of 8 million people. And so you could make a real impact. And yeah, that required a lot of legwork to maintain that outreach and education because you do outreach and education and then you stop and participation dips again. And then you do outreach and education and it peaks and then it dips again. So you have to have this steady plan for maintaining that engagement if you want to see the long-term results. But that was the exciting part about being with the city of New York is you can make big impact. And one of the examples I love to use about making big impact beyond the borders of New York City is with the e-waste law in New York State. We started out with a really onerous set of requirements in a city law, and city council, was supportive, and the agency was supportive, and it looked like it was gaining traction. And then the producer said, whoa, that's, those convenience standards are way too hard to meet. We can't possibly. And so they lobbied the state and said, hey, why don't we look at doing a statewide law, have some more reasonable convenience standards and performance metrics. And because it was the industry lobbying the state took it on and we were able to really quickly and effectively pass the EPR bill.
Can you help me unpack real quickly that convenience standard? That was something that you all were trying to make easier for consumer, but wasn't necessarily on the back end easier for some sort of vendor? Is that what was that language? What does that mean?
Yeah, it basically means providing very easy and convenient access to recycling of, in this case, the e-waste. So convenience standards are from the perspective of the end user, the consumer. And in New York City, sanitation had jurisdiction over the residential waste stream. So this was like your average consumer. And making sure that, it's as close to being on par with the convenience of throwing something away as possible. And that is definitely a hard ask to fulfill. It's expensive, and it requires that maintained outreach and education and engagement and access points and handling and infrastructure that in a city like New York is really hard. And I can't remember exactly. We usually do it by population. You must have X number of sites or something like that. And there were, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, this is a long time ago, some language around like hours of operation and days of the week accessible, and that was really to drive participation and to ensure that we're actually getting the e-waste back from people so that the law is effective. And so convenience standards now, they vary still. They're set mostly by population and distance and things like that.
And so then that's why this was important to move this conversation potentially from a municipal conversation to maybe a more statewide conversation to help balance out or implement what? What was that? What was the importance of that move?
Well, first of all, allow the whole state to be covered. So everyone in the state would have access to this new collection program.
Yeah.
But also it created a broader range of stakeholders and interest and input and different municipalities. And you have the rural areas and the suburban areas that all have different demographics and different needs, and people move through these different types of communities differently. Transportation types are different, and so it allowed for kind of a more comprehensive scoping of what a program would look like. Whereas in New York City, we're very vertical city, very space limited, not high rates of ownership of personal vehicles, and at that time, most of the e-waste that we had was legacy e-waste, like these big TVs and big desktop computers, and those are heavy things to move. And so that convenience factor became a kind of a very real discussion that needed to be addressed.
Yeah. And so then once it went to the state and it got implemented and passed, did you feel that sense of like that impact because of that scale, or did it get diluted because you're dealing with a lot more stakeholders?
I don't think it got diluted. I wasn't directly involved in the process of converting it from the city law to the state law. At that point, it was kind of outside the scope of New York City sanitation. We were a stakeholder in the process, and it drew on a lot of the language that we had developed in the bill. But in the end, I think it was a win for everybody. And honestly, I think it's an approach that could be used for other applications. And that's sort of one of the reasons I mentioned it, because if we want to see a system implemented at scale for textiles, for example, there may be a strategic advantage to looking at how we can leverage more partial municipalities or government agencies to get things through the right channels and eventually implemented.
Well, then, speaking of juggling both the textile industry and then multi-stakeholders, we can hard pivot into that RRS report. That actually is one of my first questions, and it has to do with managing stakeholders and getting a vision and project implemented and across multiple points of view. or even operations. Can you talk a little bit about the origins of this idea and this project, both from RRS standpoint, what you know about fashion for goods standpoint, and why this was both important to do? I think I noted that it seemed like this project was operationalized, funded somewhere around January 2023. And by May of 2024, you're having a report come out. So that's no insignificant feat to be able to get something going, really take hold, get it operationalized, and then extract the learnings from that. Can you talk about that origin, that process, and then that execution a little bit?
This was one of the most fun projects I have ever worked on in my career. I loved every minute of it. And Fashion for Good is the driver behind that, and they're an amazing partner. I mean, they just can convene stakeholders. So they did a lot of the heavy lifting on a lot of that. RRS was the implementation partner in the US, and I had started studying textile waste and the significant growth in textiles back in 2017, I think, and I did just a really quick analysis of the US EPA data and did some change over time calculations, and I realized how quickly it's outpacing the growth of every other major category of waste. And so I was like, we got to do something about this, right? Like this is an opportunity for RRS to lean into a new practice area, new service area as a consultancy, but also this needs to be addressed. We can't let this continue on the runaway path it's been. So I had been trying to get some waste characterization studies funded independently for probably 5 years or so, and not a whole lot of traction. I would get some interest here and there from a small municipality or from another stakeholder, but I couldn't amass the funding it would need to really allow this big, large-scale project that required equipment and travel and a lot of coordination with lots of different stakeholders. And then I saw that the Fashion for Good Sorting for Circularity Europe report came out, and I said, that's exactly what I want to do. So I cold called them and developed a relationship with them. And I think it helped that through RRS, we had published kind of this landscape report on the US. And so we had kind of that publication out there. And so we weren't just coming totally out of the blue to them. And it helped a lot that, we have a very good familiarity with the US, and we have engineers and we have people, we've done waste characterization studies, we know the players. And so I think this was a really good, really serendipitous pairing of partners, and we were able to just make it happen, and the brands were excited about it, and I got to go around. It was a long project. It was 18 months or so, but that's because there was so much field work, so much travel. And I would lug my 2 giant suitcases of NIR scanners through the airport, and I never once got stopped by security, so I was really happy about that. Because in Europe, when they had to cross, they would take trains between countries, and they'd have to go through customs. And so the equipment got held up in customs a lot of times, and that delayed the project significantly. And so I was all prepared for issues, but I encountered none. So I got to just travel to all these really amazing facilities, not always in the most, exciting parts of the country, but really amazing facilities and play with textiles for hours on end.
The first lesson I learned in that from you just now was cold call coalition building is really important in our industry. We're semi-aware of players, but it's almost the point of this podcast too, which is just reaching out and saying, hey, I want to learn more from you, or maybe there's more we can do here together. And like that, we could not harp more on that, Sabira and I, during this podcast over and over again of like, just reach out, send an email, send a phone call. We have so much work to do, all of us.
Yeah. If you have an idea, nobody's going to read your mind. And
right.
you have your own perspective on this and you're thinking about it through your own lens, and someone else may have a very similar view, but be thinking about it through their lens. And really, it's all about, it can't be more true than it is for any other sector than it is for this circular textile sector, that we really need every perspective to weigh in order to make some kind of progress that's feasible. And it's so new. We're just making all these new connections, and all the pieces of the puzzle kind of have to fit together. And we all have to take the risk together and share that risk, and share the learnings and share insights. And it's sectors and parts of the sectors that don't normally talk to each other that are now starting to talk to each other and learn and understand. And, you need to understand the limitations, that the very real life limitations that different people are dealing with in their day-to-day businesses, so that you can develop effective solutions for those. Because you can come in. I came in with like this grand view of like, oh, let's just implement this system, and
yeah, because so it sounds like you and Fashion for Good together like had that vision, and then you had to bring on a couple of implementation partners, advisory partners. Were those more cold calls? You kind of mentioned that Dolly from Fashion for Good had this ability to convene folks. How did that actually come together so quickly? And then it sounded like then you went on this journey to do the waste characterization studies. What role did those stakeholders play? And then how did that journey kind of begin?
What's great about Fashion for Good is they've established a really strong network of core brand partners that fund different initiatives throughout the year and over the course of years. And so that was the group that we started with, and said if there's a critical mass of interest in this project with their core group of brands, then we could move forward. And also, I knew that there were some brands that were more US based that would want to be involved. And so I, reached out, pulled them into the fold, and created or added to this consortium that already existed, which was, I think, key, that their Fashion for Good has this consortium, this interface, and this process. They're very good at facilitating these collaborative initiatives, high quality. They're really great at doing all of that. And they've even have a contract that had been vetted by all these different brand partners and their legal departments and all these, right? And so like even making like tiny edit to that contract is hard, because then it has to go back out for review. So it's kind of, they have this system, they spent so much time building it, and so now they leverage that to implement all these really impactful projects all across different places. And so we were able to just kind of tap right into that.
That statement about the contracts might have actually answered one of my first questions too, about the timeline, because I look at that and think 18 months is long and not long at the same time for such a project like that. But that contractual part, if anybody's listening to this, it's like getting that in order and having something that's even live and already prearranged and already sort of on the skid or already in motion. That's huge for a project like this. And so I think having anybody realize that they have their own circularity projects, that contractual part is always a large barrier to begin with, is ironing all that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had been in discussions for at least 6 months before we officially launched the project.
Yep,
Maybe even
got it.
8 months I had
Yes,
started talking
okay,
to them.
yep.
It was a very soft startup. They were vetting us, and we were kind of,
Yeah, you're
vetting
dating.
them,
You're
and
like
then
seeing,
slowly
yeah.
develop the scope. Yeah, exactly, right? But the other thing that we said that you made me think of when you mentioned the sort of established contract is that's also a benefit to having framework EPR bills. So what that is you have the structure of EPR, the agenda of EPR, the basics of EPR in place legislatively, and then programmatically you can add products to that EPR framework. And so instead of every time you want to do a new EPR bill, extended producer responsibility. I jumped right into that lingo. Then you could avoid going through the whole legislative process.
Yes.
For each one, you adopt a framework policy and you enable the agencies who are implementing the work and the programs with the authority to add products to that framework, as long as kind of the overarching rules have been set.
Then speaking and diving more into contracts, without getting too heavy into any NDAs that might have also been signed, what are the goals of some of these brands? I look at these sort of range of stakeholders, and I listed here Adidas as the lead sponsor, Inditex, Target, Levi Strauss, H&M, Eastman, Lululemon, Nordstrom, as well as the New York State Center for Sustainable Materials Management. And then you've got some implementation partners here, which we've had some familiarity with Goodwill and the volumes of textiles that Goodwill deals with on an annual basis. Not everyone's got the same agenda here. Goodwill's got end market agendas where they're dealing with significant volumes and they're trying to figure out how not maybe to send as much to developing markets, or how not to have it be downcycled, or maybe even have to more of it be downcycled or upcycled. But some of those name brands want maybe some product back, what are their agendas in this? And please talk about both as much as you can. And we understand the limitations sometimes.
No, absolutely. I think the brands whose names you see affiliated with this project are some of the leaders in pushing the boundaries and taking risks and financing research and just broadening our collective understanding of what is possible in the circular textile space. And that's also one of the main benefits that I love about Fashion for Good, is that their projects result in public-facing reports. So it's kind of democratizing access to this research and information. Of course, on the back end, the project partners may have a little deeper access into some of the data behind that, and privy to the working group calls that happen throughout the year and can contribute to the scope of the project and things. But overall, the findings are publicly available to help the common goal of advancing recovery. So I think the brands that are involved have pretty clearly defined their sustainability agendas, and they have made it clear that, they want to be part of the solution and in making the textile industry more sustainable. And they're all different in terms of how they're going about that and their specific goals. And some, a lot of it's climate related, a lot of it is waste related. And some of it is risk mitigation, but it's a combination of kind of all those things. And they are just, they have prioritized budgeting so that they could participate in activities like this. They also probably see it as sort of the first mover effect, where they may be able to have an edge on the competition if they're first to market on a solution, or if they are, their name is affiliated with sustainability or a certain recycling process or something. So there's that business opportunity, but I would say, it's also very much from their goal setting and their agenda setting perspective. We're committed to sustainability. We know the system needs to change, and we want to be part of developing that solution.
So then get into, go for it. Sorry, Marisa.
I was just going to say, and then on the part of some of those other stakeholders and partners, the sorting and grading facilities that we went to and some of the collectors we went to, they are right in the middle of this end of life system. So in a lot of ways, Goodwill is the gatekeeper of a lot of the textiles that are collected. Right now, they sort and they sell in their retail stores, and the profits drive their mission. of course, they're not for profit, and they all have this kind of mission, and some of them have different missions across the country depending on which affiliate it is. But then whatever they don't sell is sort of funneled down into other downstream pathways. And so they could decide, oh, we want to make sure that anything we're exporting meets whatever standards the end markets want in terms of quality. And so we're going to recycle, or at least sort for recycling, some of the recyclable stuff. And this is kind of how a lot of the collectors and sorters and graders that are located in the United States are starting to really think and focus, and some new entrants to the market too, that are wanting to come in and set up these sorting and grading facilities, so that there's more trust in where we're sending the materials, and that the quality of materials we're sending, because the brands are also going to start asking for that traceability and that transparency, especially as we have more regulation and policy around it, like in California. So they were very eager to participate, both the Goodwill and the sorter graders that were part of it, Help See United Southern Waste, and just for the purpose of understanding, where our growth edges, where can we, do more, or where can we grow into something, and how can we improve our own operations, or getting better line of sight into the types of materials that are flowing through from the fiber composition side of things. And also this project helped them become a little more educated on what qualifies as recyclable, what recyclers are out there, what's happening with that market, what are they asking for in terms of feedstock specifications, what can they tolerate, what can they not tolerate. And so this was an opportunity for them to, learn about and start building their own data sets, experimenting with the handheld devices, and familiarizing themselves with that process, and the labor required to use it, and then also understanding sort of those recycling end markets, and then also just being part of this working group that was sharing ideas and being part of the discussion, and hearing directly from the brands who would be on these monthly working sessions. So I think those were a lot of the reasons that they agreed to participate.
That's really, really great to hear that, with so many different aligned or different directions that it could have gone, that you all did actually get aligned, and they're able to put together something so robust that was so evidence-based. I'm curious if we can actually move into the findings. I'm looking at the data, and so like the figure 2 in the Sorting for Circularity USA report, it says that there was 15.4 million tons of textile waste generated in the US, and that was 2018 data. And I really loved how, having worked in the waste industry myself, I love the segmentation between post-industrial and pre-consumer, and then there's a residential post-consumer, and then also splitting out footwear from textiles. So it was really thorough, I think, and not generalized. It was very specific. And then you also segment into rewearable and non-rewearable. So like the data is actually really cool in and of itself, but when you zoom out and connect it to the consumer, you think about your closet. That's how I would think about it. Like the manufacturer made some stuff. There's waste from that. There's like waste from your closet, either your shoe closet or your home closet. And what is all of that made of? What is it? What does it amount to? And that's what this chart shows.
Hopefully at some point, Sabira, when we can afford some sort of graphic artist here, we can show someone's closet and then segment out their own closet in these sections. Yeah, exactly.
And I was surprised that cotton is still, 50% of that waste stream. So maybe
majorly surprised.
This is my read of like, okay, it's cool to see the data. What were your key takeaways reading, like looking at all that experience of going on site and putting the data out there? What do you think are the key things that somebody should take away if they don't read the report?
Yeah. Well, when you mentioned closet, you made me think of a comment that Pete Majorowski, co-founder of Circ, had made on a webinar I was on with him a while ago, and it's always stuck with me. He said, "When I open my closet, I see cellulose and I see polyester."
Yeah, that's exactly
Like
it. Yeah.
spoken like a true recycler. And then you open up your closet and you just see your clothes. I think some of the major takeaways are the bottom line takeaway is that our spent textiles have tremendous value. Embedded energy, inherent value. It's a commodity. It's a resource and there's a value there. And it shouldn't just be thrown away. And the extent of that value depends a lot on if it's reusable and rewearable, if it needs to be repaired. But then when the recycling side of things, it comes down to some of the nuts and bolts of just the fiber composition. And so understanding that even if it's not reusable, or even if it's not necessarily recyclable today, we need to start getting in the mindset of understanding that the molecules in this item need to be channeled back into our manufacturing supply chain. If it could go back into the textile manufacturing supply chain, awesome. If it needs to be cascaded into the raw material supply chain of a different product category, fine too. As long as we're just keeping it in circulation as much as possible. So always viewing the products, and this goes beyond textiles, always viewing the products that you interact with on a daily basis as having this inherent value, being a commodity, and not being garbage.
Yeah, that's very cool. But you also talk about like the technologies that would make that possible for the future, right? There is that inherent value, but without the technology or the system around it, then that value kind of like feels ephemeral, right? You're not actually going to be able to capture it. So can you talk a little bit about what those technologies are and how pervasive they are today or where they're headed?
Or even processes too. I mean,
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. This is where I wish I had paid much more closer attention in chemistry class as an undergrad, because it all comes down to chemistry. And I think that's what makes it so hard for people to really grasp and to understand, right? Because it ends up getting super scientific once you get down into the weeds of things, of how each different process and recycler works.
To your point, it's how many people just ask me, why can't we just do this? And it's
Right.
like, oh, it's much more weighted questions than yes. So
Yeah.
to your point, yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of different technologies. I think, we're going to have a stepwise pathway to get to the full scale textile recycling. And there's a lot of different technologies that exist today that we can leverage. People use the word recycling very loosely, but reclaimed wiping cloth is actually a really available solution for textile, non-rewearable textile waste today. And if it's absorbent, so more of the cellulosic rich, cotton rich, natural fiber materials, then it is more suitable to be just physically cut up into a reclaimed wiping cloth and sold into lots of different industries like the automotive industry and the hospitality industry. Lots of kind of oil and gas industry, lots of different industries need cleaning supplies.
Sabira, I'm here in side hustle in this. This is, I mean, we're just cutting up shirts and selling them to auto sort of shops.
Yeah, there's surprisingly a high degree of specificity in like the way it's cut,
of course there
and
is.
like all the but that is a technology that's already available and it's already happening. The clothing we're estimated we collect 15% of the clothing for recovery in the U.S. The non-rewearable fraction, about 30% of what we collect is already flowing into that downstream market. And then you have the recycling technologies, the mechanical recycling for the cellulosics, some of the thermomechanical recycling for some of the plastic-based like polyester, although we're not really doing a lot of that yet. And then we have some of the emerging technologies that fall across the spectrum of the advanced recycling or the chemical recycling. And that's the part that I think everyone's hoping that we're able to achieve, because we won't, if we don't change our design standards for textiles and we keep these kind of multi-blended, multi-material products with prints and dyes and treatments and stuff, sequins, whatever, then I don't think we will be able to be fully circular without including some of the chemical recycling.
I mean, are you suggesting a personal preference or push? We don't have to make this too professional, but is this saying, one of the stats here is you found 56% of textiles were suitable for fiber to fiber. What part of that would mean more natural fiber rather than a poly type fiber? Is the fiber to fiber more possible from a chemical recycling standpoint on the poly end or on the natural fiber end?
So do you remember the whole paper or plastic bag debate?
Yeah.
And then in the end, they were like, it's a wash. Like the LCA on it is a wash. It's kind of how I feel about the materials. I think we have to look at it kind of more holistically about the full life cycle impacts of a particular material type, and in relation to the region where it's being produced and the region where it's being manufactured and the region where it's being used, as opposed to saying, polyester is infinitely recyclable from a chemical recycling perspective or something. I don't even know if that's true. I'm sure at some point, even if you're just recycling the molecules,
I'm sure
there must be some degradation or loss or something.
But I'm sure that statistic has been used in marketing somewhere. Yeah. So, yeah.
I'm sure the media has picked up on it.
Yes. Yeah.
So I hesitate a lot in saying, we should do all natural fibers, or, we should do all synthetic fibers that are based on, renewable inputs and made with renewable energy. I'm not so sure. I do know using the renewable energy in the process of the manufacturing has a huge climate benefit. A lot of barriers to doing that conversion, but when it comes to the material itself, there are very targeted technologies and processes for each of those individual materials. So there's a process for fully chemically recycling the cotton. There's a process for fully chemically recycling nylon and for polyester. And now even for separating cotton from poly and then doing the cotton recycling pathway or the poly recycling pathway. And so from a recycling perspective, I don't know if there's a pro or a con to moving all in one direction.
Well, it speaks again to the complication of communicating these complex textiles, processes, and technologies to a consumer. When consumers so often are just like, give me a binary choice. And sometimes we just have to be like, not totally yes and no. It's more complex than that. And that is not as satisfying to an average consumer, probably, to be like, just tell me what to do. And it's like, well, you still get to choose, but like make these range of choices. And that can be complicating, but we're moving in the right direction through reports like this.
Yeah. And the other thing is that, the design choices, I think at the brand level have a huge impact on that. Consumers, I mean, this is my personal opinion. I don't think consumers should have to go and scan, label, and do lots of deep reading in order to make a choice about what they purchase. It should be everything that we put on the market for consumers should have a solution, end-of-life solution, that is accessible and easy for the consumer to participate in at end of life.
For whatever reason, this just hit me that when we go to a restaurant, we know everything we're going to be served is edible. We don't have to make a choice of being like, okay, which more research can we do here? And it's like that should be the same of like what we put on our bodies should be as holistic as what might go into a process that then can be reclaimed or reused or into the holistic system of that.
Well, yeah, and that actually goes back to what you talked about earlier, which is the EPR framework is, I mean, that's what those things are meant to do. I guess I'm curious in your point of view, Marisa, how much have we actually progressed in the textile industry with EPR adoption and how that has influenced the development of these technologies, especially for like those unique cases of the different types of materials, textiles?
Yeah, we've made huge strides on the EPR front. California passed. It's at, in front of the governor for signature, but no one has concerns about that not happening. So in my mind, it's as good as enacted. In Europe, we're seeing lots of adoption and a mandate for the EPR systems likely coming. And New York has a bill that has been proposed and is at the early stages of being weighed in on by the industry and lots of different stakeholders. And the thing that we haven't seen yet is really the implementation of EPR, except for in France, where it's been around for a long time. And that's gone through growth and revisions to make it more effective. But so it's a little early to say that EPR is kind of life-changing. I do think that EPR has to be paired with other supportive policies like recycled content requirements and other types of incentives that are either built into the modulated fees or adopted kind of in concert with the EPR legislation, or as integrated into the regs or the performance standards, or just even the program plans that a PRO will put together. But I do think it's gonna move the needle as long as we're smart about how we implement it and meet the requirements of the law.
And then is that in the same sort of statement of saying, as long too as we can, I mean, this kind of starts getting into, I forget what you all call them, the Effective Materials Management Foundation, that as that legislation's coming in, there's, I don't know the interdependency of these six, they're called the sort of six elements of effective recovery systems, that it's not just EPR. EPR is one facet of a successful system, but you need these other elements. And I think I would love to pull those apart a little bit. Because I think EPR comes in, I'm trying to see which one's level legislation, number 5. But there's a couple others in there. What were your thoughts on putting this together in sort of that structured way of that 6 elements?
Yeah, and EPR kind of influences the whole system. I think it's one of the critical ones that influence and provide the right incentives to change the economics.
The guidelines, the structure.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
The rules by which businesses and our economy operate. Those elements, those 6 elements of the effective recovery system, is straight from some work that one of my brilliant colleagues, Ann Johnson, has developed over the years. So we kind of have applied that framework to the way we think about packaging recovery and plastics and electronics and food waste and any other materials management system. And so I just kind of lifted her pretty diagram and plopped it into the textile space and built the story around it. But basically, yeah, we need integration across all those different stakeholders and across all those different aspects of the recovery value chain for it to actually function as a circle and in unison with each other.
To then paint that picture for our viewers and listeners, it starts with collection, it then goes to processing, end markets, education and engagement, supporting policies from the EPR standpoint, and then collaborative partnerships, which we even started with cold calling, the coalition building element of this. What's lacking currently? What was the biggest red flag in sort of where we noticed some either regional deficiencies, technology deficiencies, even processing capability? Some you mentioned a couple. I'm curious what was the biggest one that stood out to you, or the one that then also is maybe the biggest red flag, and then on the flip side has the most opportunity for growth. Was there one that stood out to you the most?
The one I'll talk about not necessarily because it's sort of the biggest red flag, but
Yeah,
because it's where my personal interest really lies,
great.
and that's
Yes.
in the sorting. So there's a big gap in the system for circular textiles in the textile aggregation and sorting into all the different end markets for textile recycling. We have that system now. Go ahead.
As you're talking about that, I don't think, sometimes listeners don't understand volume and why that's so important to sort. So as I would love for you to pull that apart a little bit and paint us the picture of, like, I mean, I've seen a mountain of clothes before. And so I think it's so interesting to paint that picture for a consumer. You're like, why is that? It seems like it's just people. It's like, no, no, no. This is a lot of people. There's a lot of maybe even robotics that go into this. I would love to relay what you saw in the field maybe while you're talking about that sortation.
Oh, yeah. I mean, these sorting facilities can be enormous. And I only saw a few of them, and I only saw a few domestic ones. You go to some other countries where the labor is a lot more affordable, and you see these vast warehouses that span football fields, floor to ceiling, bales of textiles, machinery, conveyor belts moving things, data, computer systems capturing information at every stage, machines whirling, you've got the shredders and the shoddy side of the recycling process and all these different things. But it really is a volumes game because we generate so much waste. And also because it's such a small margin market. It's kind of pennies on the pound. We're talking about pennies on the pound, the way that we handle them today. I think they're more valuable than that, but we've externalized a lot of that impact, and so it's a pennies on the pound market now, and so you need the volume in order to make it financially viable to do any kind of operation. There's kind of a threshold of volume at which you could say, okay, it makes sense to make the CapEx investment and the OpEx investment and to actually pursue a sorting facility.
And so how does that
Regardless
play
of
out? And yeah, and how does that play out into your now passion or continued passion for that sorting process?
Yeah, so we have lots of sorting capacity globally for recycling and for shoddy and for rag. But if we want to start doing this textile to textile recycling loop and recovering the cotton fibers and the polyester fibers and the nylon fibers and the wool, whatever, we need to be able to sort it into a bale that is 98% plus cotton only, not 95% plus polyester only, and we can't do that unless we have technology and equipment that can help us do that, because it's impossible to tell if it's not, there are graders who have gotten very, very good at picking something up and saying what it is, but you can't do it down to a percentage point, and that's what some of these chemical recyclers really need. And you can't read the labels because either the label is incorrect. There was a study that Circle Economy did saying that 40% of the labels are inaccurate for a whole host of different reasons, or it's missing, or it's rubbed off and you can't read it anymore.
Right.
And so you can't rely on that. So you need some technology to be able to evaluate what it is. If it's an RFID that comes in with a digital product passport and you scan it, it tells you what it is, great, right? I think we're pretty far away from that. So now we have like near infrared or hyperspectral or just visual cameras, this vision system that you can run materials under, and it'll tell you what it is. And then you can sort it based on that using air jets and conveyors and bunkers and all sorts of different fun equipment. And that's what kind of gets me interested and excited, is how do you optimize the efficiency of a system like that? How do you automate it? And how do you just make those incremental improvements so that the overall system is running well? You could handle lots of volume, you could scale it, and you can funnel all those different output streams to the right place.
So I'm glad that you mentioned being excited. We normally like to close out with hope and what you're hopeful about. I'm curious, maybe if you could just say, like, between technology, process, regulation, because you have experience in all of them and you have expertise in all of them, where would you place your bets to have the most impact? I know we need all three, but like, where should we lean in the most?
Policy. We need to level the playing field, the competitive playing field. We need to make investors and corporations and brands feel comfortable making investments that will end up playing out positively.
Amazing.
That could not
thank you
be
so much.
more clear. Yes, so thank you.
Yeah. This is great. Great having you on. Thank you for joining us on Selling Circular.
Thanks
Thank you,
so much
Marisa.
for having me. It was a pleasure.